T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Trap Talk Reptile Network, coolest reptile network in the world. Welcome to episode 565, All in the Tree Tuesdays. We got Damon, the guy who produced the very first albino green tree python on tonight's show. Good friend of Marshall's. It's going to be quite the episode. A lot of history on tonight's episode. So you guys are in for a treat, man. But shout out to everyone out there who's tapping in. If you're into the condro game or wanting to learn about the green tree python game, this is the podcast to be subscribed to. All right, so first and foremost, want to hit the like button, get the likes up, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. You'll be reminded by doing that, okay? You'll get notifications to your phone anytime there's a podcast. We have 7 podcasts a week. Every day of the week, there's a podcast being dropped out of the Trap Talk Reptile Network. So thank you to all the support, first and foremost. And just to remind you guys, you can listen to Trap Talk Reptile Network episodes on all major audio platforms, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I don't know why. Normally I don't forget that. But anyways, it's been quite the day. I hope everyone's week's off to a good start. But I'm very excited, man. Shout out to everyone, by the way, who's in the chats. If you think that tonight's episode is worth of any super chats, don't be shy, especially if you have a topic or an important question that relates to what we're talking to tonight. Then yeah, man, don't be shy, man. But I'll be definitely interacting with people in the chats. First and foremost, if you're looking for exclusive content, you want to get more out of what you see out of each episode, please don't hesitate by joining the Trap Talk Patreon family. You can do that by clicking first link in the description below, get connected to a Discord and an awesome Instagram group chat. So shout out to all my Patreon members. You guys are my heart. Details with Trap Fest 2025 coming very, very shortly. And I just want to say, guys, thank you to anyone out there who's supporting US ARC and doing their part. You could do your part by supporting US ARC. By going to usarc.org, become a member today, help get these memberships get high as possible. That way, when it comes to battling legislations and, taking stuff to that Supreme Court, things look good on our end. So thank you to Phil Goss. Thank you to anyone out there who supports US ARC. Seriously, it really means a lot. But let's get this battle going together, guys, because no way could we do this without US ARC. So thank you so much, Phil Goss. I also want to say tonight's episode is brought to you by Gary Scavino, one of the best doing it in the arboreal game. And as far as teaching it, the best doing it, teaching it goes. You got to go to GS Reptiles on YouTube and see what his YouTube videos are all about. All right. Amazing content, educational, yet funny at the same time. But if you're looking to get into the Emerald Tree Boa game or, the Condro game or carpet pythons or diamonds or, the list goes on, Bolani, this is a guy you're going to want to be following. All right. So GS Reptiles again on YouTube. You can also follow Gary on his Instagram page as well. GS Reptiles. Thank you, Gary, for being such an OG and a good supporter of the trap since day one, man. Real deal stuff, man. I want to say also tonight's episode is brought to you by Focus Cube Habitats, #1 PVC enclosure in the game, over 30 different designs. If you go to focuscubehabitats.com, shout out to Steven, shout out to Ashley, two of the best doing it out of Texas. And yeah, again, that's focuscubehabitats.com. Follow them on IG, all right, and also subscribe to their YouTube. Thank you so much, Stephen Ashley, for all your love and support. Looking forward to continuing our partnership in 2025. Also, tonight's episode brought to you by Blake Exotic Feeders, #1 quail delivered to your doorstep. I'm telling you right now, it's the best when this quail is produced by the guy selling it to you. No third-party transaction, straight from the source. All right, Blake's killing it in the quail game. Button quail, day-old quail, small, medium, all the way to extra large. So please, guys, get your quail from the best. That's Blake Exotic Feeders. Head over to his IG, send him a message. He'll hook up all my trappers. All right, he's already been doing that. So thank you so much, Blake, for everything that you've done. And again, that's Blake Exotic Feeders on IG. All right, last but not least, shout out to one of the best coming out of Texas and putting Texas keepers on. That's Mark Hager out of Texas Chondros. Please head over to Mark's Instagram and see all the amazing posts that he's done for not only his own work, but other amazing Texas Chondro keepers. So Mark Hager, Texas Chondros, TX Chondros on Instagram. Head over to texaschondros.com. Be ready for what could be available coming in 2025. All right. Rumor also has it. He has a couple of availabilities that just popped up. Mark, you're supposed to give me information on that. But for now, guys, if you want to get the 411 on what available, what couple snakes that popped up available on us all of a sudden when Mark's collection, go hit him up right now on IG. Find out what those are. All right. And without further ado, here we have Bill Stiegel and Marshall Mendez at Two Big Dogs in the building. What's up, fellas?
Good evening.
Cheers. Marshall, you have your TV on, or someone has the TV on? They got to turn that shit off.
Yeah, I'll turn it off.
God damn it, Bill. What's going on?
It's good to be with you guys.
Cheers. Marshall's in bumfuck New York somewhere, he said. I don't know.
Yeah, for work.
Yeah,
You don't sound thrilled at all.
Got to pay the man.
That's right. Let me turn this thing around here.
Yeah, this is the first time Marshall's low. Normally, Marshall's the loudest person on the screen. Now we can't even hear him a little bit. Marshall, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. You can't hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
And for the first time, he was like 10 minutes early.
Yeah,
I normally use my phone. I want to try to use my laptop tonight.
It looks good. I like it a lot better.
When I saw we had 7 minutes to the live and he was in sound check, I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it.
Well, I've also been sitting in my hotel room with nothing to do, twiddling my thumbs for the last 3 hours, like waiting for the show to start. Normally, I'm like, it's 8:06. I'm usually like just pulling in my driveway right now.
There's only so much porn you can watch in a New York hotel room.
Dude, Marshall,
man.
Why don't you give us a breakdown on who tonight's guest is? Because I obviously met him through you at Daytona where you guys all met.
Yeah.
Seems like a cool guy, but I don't know much of him. So why don't you give me and the viewers tonight of what we're in for?
Yeah, so Damon has been into reptiles, and I mean he's been in the chondro GTP world as long as I've been in it. He's one of the OGs. And kind of his claim to fame is that he produced the first albino chondro, which kind of started everything for me, for Trooper, kind of all the U.S. albino.
Oh, great.
Oh, boy.
Wow. Use the laptop. He wants to use the laptop. And this is what we go through whenever Marshall wants to switch things up. He goes so long with not fucking up. And here he goes, fucking up.
It's
how it started.
Mark, we didn't hear anything you said, by the way, buddy. You
Are you serious?
Yeah, that was fucking. So don't you?
It's that Super 8 hotel Wi-Fi.
I'm on my phone hotspot.
That explains it.
Okay, we legit didn't hear anything you just said. You have to start from the top.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, Damon's been in the game as long as I remember. He's definitely an OG from back in the day. He's had all kinds of snakes, and I know he does a lot of field herdman, but kind of his claim to fame in the chondro world is he produced the first albino chondro, which was I think back in. I'll let him go into the specifics. I think it was in the early 2000s. I remember going to a Daytona show with the Chondro Coalition, and he had kind of unveiled it at the Daytona. Oh, no, sorry, Daytona, Orlando. Yeah, I think it was Daytona. Kind of unveiled the albino chondro at the show, and he made some flyers, which I still have it somewhere in my stuff. He made like some little posters of the snake and kind of unveiling it. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing him talk all about how it happened and kind of the history behind it, and, learn some information when I saw him at NARBC Dallas earlier this year with you guys. That's probably the last time I saw him was probably at that Daytona show in the early 2000s. So it's been 20-something years probably. And
I just want to say, I kind of felt like what my shorter friends always feel like, because all you motherfuckers were tall that day for some reason. I know David's a tall dude, right? If I remember, he's like about the same height as you and Bill.
Yeah, probably.
Correct me
Yeah,
if I'm
I don't
wrong,
remember exactly, but
I just remember you guys were hanging out all around. I just felt small. I was like, man, this is fucking this ain't cool. I went to go hang out with Sony.
you're not even that small though. What are you?
I went to go hang out with Sony. No, but I honestly just felt like the energy as far as like the connection you guys all had with Chondros. It was like it was heavy that day. You know, you had Ken Deal that was hanging out in that table as well. There was a good group of you when we met Damon at Daytona. I won't forget. It was a good time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, wait, was it Daytona or was it Texas?
No, it was Texas.
Texas. Okay, not Daytona. That's
Marshall, we'll ask Damon when he comes on. But do you know, was he at ICAST?
I think he was. Now that yeah, I don't know about ICAST. I know he was at one of the. Now that you mention it, I think he was at one or both of the arboreal symposiums. So that's probably the last time I saw him, which was a couple years after this Daytona show that I was talking about earlier. But maybe he was at ICAST. Honestly, I can't remember. Everything starts to run together.
Yeah, let's not ask Marshall any more details because he clearly doesn't remember shit. We'll ask Damon. We'll save all the good stuff for Damon. And I said we just bring him on. You guys ready or what?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, shout out to everyone in the chats, man. Let's get the likes up. Episode 565 coming at you right now. Do what you got to do to get your mind right. Do what you got to do to stay hydrated. Damon, the very first albino chondro producer, coming at you right now. Let's go. Sure.
Good.
You ready for do more in the future? Trap Talk podcasts?
Yes.
Man.
Only Trap Talk. Exclusive.
Yes.
Exclusive. Oh.
So stop calling us.
Rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the crowd, gotta love it or not. I'm hot from the hop to the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with everybody, we do it. Everybody, we do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up, rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up, rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up, rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up.
And we're live, episode 565. What's up, Damon?
What's up, man?
Thanks for being here.
Damon, what's happening, man?
A whole lot.
Hey, Damon.
Good to be here, man. I
See you
appreciate
again, man.
appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of history with you and Chondros, but even like with Marshall, right? You know, you and Marshall go way back, and he failed miserably right now with some details. So if you don't mind, kind of breaking it down for all of us, your introduction into Chondros, and how are you even how are you the chosen one with this whole producing albino chondro? And let's get down to the beginning of it.
Yeah, so I'll give you probably a little bit of a preface that would probably set the stage for how this all came to be.
Sure.
I grew up in Florida and grew up in a family that was had kind of a pervasive fear of reptiles, and I followed suit. And it wasn't until we had moved to New Mexico when I was a child that I had an experience with another kid who found a garter snake, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. He saw that I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and then decided to make it his life's mission to make me have something to do with it.
Huh.
And he threw it at me, and I put my hands up, and it got caught in my hands and didn't fall right away. And in the ensuing 10 or 15 seconds, I came to realize that this snake wasn't doing to me what I had always been told snakes would do.
Yeah.
And it completely flipped the table and turned into a lifelong fascination about snakes. I mean, I went from not wanting to have anything to do with them to wanting everything to do with them. And I did science fair projects in school on snakes. And I mean, my mom was horrified, and pretty soon I had a bedroom full, and that went from, me being 13 years old all the way up to present day, where I've not had snakes. But when I first got started looking for snakes, I really did the only thing I knew to do, which was to go out and try to find them. There were no organized reptile shows at the time. And I came to appreciate during all of those early years what geology and geography and the ecosystems that surround all of these animals, what all that has to do with the phenotypes that are present in all the different areas in which they occur. And so my focus from a very early age was directed very heavily towards locality animals. I appreciated those wide variety of differences that were associated with just even a small change in geography, whether you've got allopatric, speciation or just that sort of thing. So that was always a great appeal to me, and I got my start kind of early on looking for gray-banded king snakes in West Texas, and it came to really appreciate the locality piece of it. So I was in West Texas. I spent some time with Craig Trumbauer. Craig had driven to West Texas from Florida and had spent a couple of days on the way out with Dave and Tracy Barker. And Craig said, dude, I saw some snakes this weekend that you would just die, right? And this was right at kind of the onset of the effort for the farmers and the importers to start tying locality names to things.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I saw BX, I saw, a whole slew of things. Mainland, or I mean, at least, the Indonesian half of Papua, but a bunch of really neat stuff. But he said, dude, she had a pair of the most beautiful emerald green snakes with white stripes down their backs. And he said, my jaw was hanging on the floor. And so that kind of stuck in my head. And later that year, I drove to Bernie and spent some time with Dave and Tracy and went through, and this was at the peak of their collection as it related to that Pythons of Australia book. And so the variety was massive. This was pre, ball python age. And so the variety was huge. I mean, there were olive pythons, there were water pythons, there were all manner of different carpets. And we got to the chondro room, and I walked in and saw the adult Merauke or Tandemera animals, and was just as floored by them as Craig was. And I told Tracy, I said, look, if you breed these, I have to get some, because this is the ideal for me. It's a beautiful example of an animal that comes from a place of which I'm very fond, and you've got tight locality data on where those animals originated, and that floated my boat. So this all starts with me reaching out to Tracy, and Tracy reaches out at some point the next year and said, well, guess what? And I said, what? She said, I went into the snake room today and found her ovulating. And she said, it looks like we've got some babies on the way. And I said, well, just put me top of your list, whatever you're not going to hold back. And Tracy was notorious for this. The baby room was always just thousands of snakes because she couldn't bear to part with them. But I told her, I said, I've got to get some of these if you're going to part with any. So she hatched them, and I made another trip down and picked out my pair. And as most of us do with snakes, you start off small. You start off with something you're passionate about, something you can afford.
Yeah.
And you raise them up and you produce them, and you develop a little liquidity and you reinvest, and gradually things grow and grow. And this was to a point after years of being very successful breeding gray-banded king snakes and a whole slew of other clubers and some pythons, that it was time, right? So I went down to pick up the pair, and just as I was leaving with a big smile on my face, Tracy said, "Hold on a second." And she ran back into the room and she came out with another cup and she said, "I want you to have this one." And it was a sibling to the two that I had purchased. So I brought those home and raised them up. This would have been in 96 or 7.
Damn. What a
And,
year.
yeah, right.
Fucking 96, bro.
Oh yeah. So I brought them home, raised them up, and then was all about. I had other tree pythons that I'd gotten previously. Craig was very early on producing tree pythons and hatching large percentage of the clutches when a lot of other people besides Trooper and Eugene were really struggling. I mean, it was common to hear about people getting 20 or 30 egg clutches and hatching 2 or none. It was
Wow.
it was a real struggle because there wasn't a lot known, and when you're dealing with a maternally incubating species, there's all sorts of nuance, and most people didn't have access to the ability to be able to test and data log the temperatures and figure out what was going to work and what humidities were going to work. So I'd had some previous to that, but these were my favorites. They were great, and I raised them up and did everything to accommodate them in the caging, and they bred, and she ovulated, and I forget the number of eggs now. She was probably, it was a smaller clutch. It was maybe 13 or 14 eggs. And I built my first incubator in order to deal with those. And this was back when I knew far less about, what was required and what they were going to need. And I did my best and hatched most of the clutch. I think I only lost 1 egg during incubation. And, the day that your first tree python clutch starts pipping, it never gets old. It never got old. But the day your first clutch starts to pip, oh my goodness.
Hey, Damon, I don't want to interrupt your story, but as a side note, I met Craig for the first time in Dallas.
He's a great guy.
To see him and Casey, and I think maybe Marshall and me, Casey Lasik, and maybe MJ, we got a picture with those guys. Truly.
Yeah, Damon's in it too.
Yeah.
That's right. Damon's in that picture too. So to be able to, see that, the whole Dallas experience was worth it for me, just to be able to meet. I'd met Casey Lasik before, but to meet Craig for the first time, I knew the influence that he had early. Most people don't associate with the barkers, even with green tree pythons, right?
Right.
Ball pythons usually.
Yeah, ball pythons or the bloods.
Blood pythons. Yeah.
But to be able to to meet Craig and to see you and to see Casey Lasik again, all that's like, man, it's just
well,
legends.
I was fortunate. Just I'm so thankful that my life took the trajectory that it did, because when you have a passion and that passion ends up directing you toward other people with passions. Yeah. I met Craig and Linda in West Texas, and immediately the people that I ran into in West Texas set themselves apart from a lot of other people in the rest of the world, and the fact that they're willing to make sacrifices to go someplace far, far away to try to look for something that, was hard to find. So you knew these people were driven, and I met, Craig and Linda out there, and we got to be lifelong friends, and he's had an enormous impact on my life, just because of the his drive and his passion for doing things right and not accepting anything less than his best. And it was I'm so thankful because this interest found me in the company of people like Craig and people like Dave and Tracy and people like Casey, who have got great stories and are people who go out and really live a life that's worth talking about. And it's been an amazing thing to have friends and acquaintances that are working hard to do the undone and to do things that, hadn't been tried before, and to try to breed things that had never been bred, and try to learn how to find them and keep them. It's a puzzle, and it's a great journey. And
I don't think we can, say enough. And we've said it many, many times on this podcast and others, what a great debt we owe to those people, the community at large now.
Right.
And like you said, most of the people that are, heavily into green trees now, they don't know those people. Right.
Yeah.
But we've had a long history of celebrating, our founding fathers, so to speak. And I think it's one thing that separates our community from a lot of the others, just to give homage to people, all of them.
And I want to say too, Damon, like everything comes in era, right? Like this, like you were a part of that unique era during that time. And like, I could totally relate what you're talking about with Craig, because shit, I'm looking at my Craigs right now. Bill and Marshall are basically my fucking Craigs. You know what I mean? Like,
That's scary. Yeah,
I'm sorry
to say,
it's
guys.
coming, man. It's coming, Marshall.
It feels like fuck you, MJ.
MJ, you need a few more mentors, is what you need.
Hey, all I need is 3, bro. All I need is 3, and it's easy. All right. No, but seriously, like, listen, it's been quite the time coming into this hobby because of the people I've met. At first, it was just about the animals for me, and that's all I really cared about. But you can't help but to just realize that you're meeting some of the most amazing people all because of the animals, and
Right.
And mind you, like, you meet other keepers that inspire you to do better. You realize how awesome of keepers there are out there, which makes everything come full circle, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I want to get to you raising these babies you got from the Barkers, right? So like can we get to like you getting to the point of having chondros to breed and what your approach was back then?
Yeah, I mean, I was still kind of, feeling out, the whole thing, because I think what suited me well was that my experience looking for snakes in the wild had me more attuned to, my dog is losing its mind over here.
You're good.
I think looking for snakes in the wild had me more attuned to just how important natural weather cycles are. And, I spent time in the engineering and science library at the University of New Mexico looking up historical weather data for Irian Jaya, just because I was trying to get an understanding of what sort of temperatures these animals were dealing with. I think everybody at the time, not everybody, but certainly a lot of people find pythons synonymous with tropical, humid, hot forests. And it turned out that a lot of these animals were coming from places that were experiencing nighttime lows that were sort of startling during certain parts of the season. Yeah. And so that was, I thankfully had been able to apply some of that in trying to learn how to breed these things, and finding out that those cold temperatures and those winter fronts were incredibly valuable in order to trigger reproductive behavior. And that first season, I was keeping those animals in a room that was controlled to a pretty comfortable, ambient as far as I was concerned. But during the winter, I would crack the windows and open the vents on the cages and wait for a winter front to come through. And it was amazing to watch them do what they did. And so I was successful, at least in getting reproductive behavior. And then when I saw my first female ovulate. That was, exciting. And then the animals that I got from Dave and Tracy, I raised up, that, I think they were 4 years old. Let's see, 2002 to 98, 97, could have been 4 or 5, when I tried to breed them for the first time. And I also was not a fan of raising animals too quickly. Certain species have, a very fast kind of a growth and reproduction cycle, but other species take time. And if you rush it, you're asking for problems.
Oh, big time.
And so I took my time and I kept them. And I even remember, this is kind of an aside, but I remember at one of the arboreal symposiums that y'all were talking about earlier, that David Wilson came and was speaking about the work that he had done in Cape York and in the Iron Range. And I remember there was a kind of a statement made by him about a female that he had collected and had kept because it looked as though she may be gravid. And she laid eggs, and he was able to take metrics on the weight of the eggs and the ultimate, length of the female, her weight after oviposition. And she after she had laid eggs was 700 grams. And I remember some of the conversations that took place after he said that. And everybody's like, God, why am I waiting for 1,000 grams? So, 700's fine. But the disparity there is that, it might take a snake in the wild 6 years to get to 700 grams, whereas in captivity, it's not uncommon for people to get on 1,000 in a much shorter period of time. So I think, my time spending out in the wilderness looking for animals and coming to realize those natural sort of feast and famine cycles, those drought rain period cycles, and how quickly those animals were growing was important in how I kind of kept my animals. I tried to, never push them beyond what I thought they were designed to, and how they had evolved to be successful. So anyway, I raise up the Merauke or Tanamera animals from Tracy. They breed. She lays eggs. The eggs incubate. The eggs pip. The eggs they start hatching. The animals are emerging.
How many eggs, Damon, we talking here?
I would have to go back and check my records, but I'm thinking she laid 13 or 14, and I think I hatched 12.
Okay.
And I had them in a vertical incubator, and this was a predecessor to my ultimate, incubator design, where I was trying out some things with trying to keep humidity up. I mean, I live in New Mexico, and our ambient humidity here is about 9%. So it requires a fairly significant amount of effort to keep, high humidity.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
Damon, how old was that female when she laid?
So I believe I got her when in 97 maybe. So she would have been, because she would have been 4, I think, when she bred for the first time. And then there came that morning where, I thought I was walking downstairs to go check the incubator and marvel at these little yellow babies that were all going to be curled up around the rim of the deli cups in which their eggs sat for the last number of days. And I had them in a closet. And so I opened the door to the closet and opened the incubator and took the egg box out. And the light that I had in that closet wasn't particularly bright. And I popped the lid to look at them, and was kind of caught off guard by the fact that I thought I was seeing pink eyes on several of them. And I thought, well, this can't be right. Maybe this is just sometimes you get other species that are sort of late to develop melanin, right?
Yeah, right.
They
look like freaks.
Yeah, they're a little ghosty, and then maybe they're that darkness kind of shores up. They didn't look all that dissimilar from their clutch mates, because the yellow babies with the red dorsal markings are, they're already lacking a whole bunch of melanin anyway. But I turned the lights off and went and got a headlamp and kind of waited for it to get dark and then put the lights on them and figured out what was going on. And I sent a picture to Craig, and immediately the phone rings, and he says, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And I said, I don't know, but it looks like this might be happening. And he was just beside himself. And it was a weird moment because I had never really aspired to be, in that vein. I never saw herpetoculture as a business. I never wanted it to be a business because I didn't want it to be, I don't know. Sometimes when you make something a job, you lose some of what's magical about it. And
it brings stress that like you just don't want
absolutely.
To do. You know what I mean?
Well, it brings stress, and as I found out, it also added a whole other logistical factor to who was interested, it kind of got into a weird spot where I was uncomfortable, dealing with some of the questions I was getting, or trying to be the responsible one where you knew you had somebody who may have been on the brink of making a bad financial decision because they had stars in their eyes about, being in the ground floor of a project like this. And, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to make so much money. And that part of it was never appealing to me anyway. But, I guess I say, as the old adage goes, if you want to make money breeding snakes, if you want to make $1 million breeding snakes, you start with 2 million,
Yeah.
But it was a weird, sort of a paradigm shift. But, and I had, some offers early on after we had announced, the fact that we had produced a couple, and I couldn't bear the thought of going that route, just because I felt like here was a real opportunity to do something novel and exciting and to learn more about how to do well with these animals. And it took me down a wonderful road of learning how to effectively incubate tree python eggs, how to effectively breed them, how to keep them, how to feed them, just learning the little, I started to feel, based on what I was learning from even Carl Sweetak and some other people who had been in the field to see these things, I started to be able to understand that, maybe there was some niche partitioning going on with, adults that were occupying a different sort of a prey profile, and youngsters, that Carl said, well, we saw several youngsters that were down in the understory caudal luring during the day. And everybody always has that mindset that they're, that they're nocturnal animals, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because some of the localities that I ultimately ended up working with ended up doing better when I was trying to feed them during the day, even with the same prey items. So it's all those little puzzles that you get to unlock when you figure out how to breed a species.
And this was your first time producing chondros?
Yes. It was my very first clutch.
And how many albinos were in the clutch?
There were 2 in that first clutch. One of them was small. It ended up passing away about 6 days after it had hatched. It was very weak and very small.
Yellow, right? These are yellow neos?
Yep, all yellow neos. The Tanamera locality is genetically
yellow,
tied to Cape York and even across the Arafura Sea into Aru. So they're all very typically yellow neonates. But the one that survived was Floyd. That was
this guy right here, right? That's Floyd.
Yeah, that's him.
Dude, how old is Floyd in this photo right here?
I believe he was about 3 there.
Oh my god!
And he was robust. He was a great feeder from the get-go, a fantastic animal, and I had him up until not too long ago. I had a sort of a nostalgic connection with him, and so he was always gonna stay here.
Wait, so wait,
Yeah.
where's Floyd now?
Floyd is no longer with us.
Oh, he went to the Condro Gods.
Yep, he went to the Condro Gods, but
He was pretty old.
He hatched in 2002.
Oh, fuck, that's good life.
Yeah.
Damn,
So he
Versace's holding it down, man. I'm waiting to see what snake outlives Versace, and I think Versace's the oldest breeding male snake ever, or chondro ever right now.
Very well could be.
Yeah, that's
so what was Tracy's reaction when you ultimately told her that you had produced the albino from animals?
So
you got from her.
That was. You know what? It was a really great thing. Immediately, her mind shifted to the business aspect of it. That was the way Tracy is and was. She was always planning. She was always thinking ahead, always trying to work a project and always trying to figure something out. So immediately she was like, "Oh, like that's awesome." But after that initial excitement, she said, "You know what?" She said, I'm so happy." She said, "It's hard not to think that, those genes, went through my fingers." But she said, who's to say that we would have produced them if we kept them? Because we could have paired up different pairs and we would never have known.
So
and
Damon,
she said, I'm so thankful.
The Barkers didn't keep any of those clutch mates that you had. Obviously, they did not go on to produce albinos.
Yeah, to my knowledge, no. I think she ultimately, and I think what happened there, like I said, their collection at the time was incredibly diverse. There were some astounding snakes. I mean, they had king horneye and 50 million different versions of carpet pythons. Some of them tied into localities. And
Womas, blackheads, retics, burnt. I mean, they had it all.
Oh, I mean, amethystines and water pythons and Bismarck ring pythons, everything. Yeah. I mean, I spent 3 days there taking pictures of snakes I had never seen before. Some species I'd never seen before.
See, that must be crazy. Oh my god.
Oh my gosh. And it was incredible because their facility, there was a long central hallway at these rooms that would go off either side, and the rooms were 30 feet long and 10, 12 feet wide. And there were, just rooms and rooms and rooms and rooms. And it was for somebody like me that was just hopped on pythons, especially at that time, like it was a thing. I mean, they had an assembled collection of some of the most magnificent animals I've ever seen.
So you guys have never watched it. There's a National Geographic did a
Tracy Burger,
a thing on them. Yeah, it's called A Passion for Pythons. If you can probably, I'm sure it's on YouTube. And they did kind of like an overview of their entire collection. So it shows them like cutting open super tiger and tiger retic eggs, which were, just coming out. Just one of the first times they had been reproduced. It's really cool. Kind of gives an oversight of everything they were doing at the time.
And that was one of the things I always loved, about them, was that they were so academically driven, and both of them so insatiably curious about, everything that had anything to do with the animals they loved so much. And it was remarkable. I mean, Tracy even showed me video footage while I was down there of a children's python that had laid a clutch of eggs and then was sort of systematically nosing around in its own clutch. And it before the eggs adhered, found infertile eggs and excluded them from the group that it, ultimately ended up incubating or attempting to. Wow. So there was just all of these things that, that you come to learn when these epiphanies, these little discoveries that you have along the way were just fantastic. And they were always hungry for that. So it was always good company to be in, because she always had great stories, and Dave always had great stories. I mean, it was.
So I got to ask you, okay, was there a certain point where the pricing of the albinos came into play? Like, okay, did you sell any first and foremost? Like, did you end up selling any albinos, or what happened with that?
Yeah. So that same pairing produced several more albinos, and I had those until, there was a period in my life where, I went through some personal things, and I never had any trouble keeping care of the collection, but it was just, I realized that, with how I had grown the collection, I mean, I was keeping, I don't know, I had probably 100 and, well, let's just back up for a second. So the first year that I aggregated a large collection of tree pythons, and the first year that I produced tree pythons, with that large group, I had the first female ovulated, and I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome. And then I went into the snake room the next morning, and there were 2 more females ovulating, and I'm like, yeah. And then I went in like 2 days later, and there's another one ovulating, and I'm like, oh no. So I produced, I think, I forget how many clutches that year, but it ended up being like 110 or 111 hatchlings that year. And so the collection grew very quickly. And at some point, I probably had 180 tree pythons here, so that like it had gotten crazy. And when I went through, what I went through, I knew it was kind of an untenable thing to maintain at that pace, because it was requiring a significant amount of effort, especially with the way I like to keep animals.
Yeah, shit can get serious real quick.
Yeah, well, and I'm just an anal retentive keeper too. So I mean, I love everything to just be
smooth,
perfect,
and obviously
perfect in its place.
Obviously, you had a day job at that time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and raising a son, and so it was a lot. And so I got to the point where I was, I sort of started from the low hanging fruit and started to kind of find some homes for stuff. And when I got to a point where I thought, you know what, I don't know if I want to push this hard, or even in some ways leave the door open for me to like dive back into it again. I don't tend to be obsessive in terms of the fact that I get a lot of snakes, and I've always had a pretty consistent collection, but I had never had one that size. I mean, I had, in addition to that, I mean, I had a massive collection of colubrids and was working with a whole bunch of different stuff.
Can you give us a ballpark? Can you give us a ballpark the amount of chondro females you had, like the most you had at one point? Like just an idea, like how what
adults?
Number? Yeah, adults. Like what was the most you
had? There were probably between 20 and 25.
Just females, or are you including like pairs?
That's just females. Yeah,
just females. Okay.
Yeah, and I never sent the whole collection every year. I mean, I routinely would give. I mean, so Floyd's mom ended up, I said, producing 2 more albinos.
Yeah, and
that wasn't until 2 years after she laid that first clutch, because I'd never, I didn't like the idea of even going every year. And I think there's probably some localities that can deal with that, but it's an incredibly expensive, physiologically, especially for tree pythons that are so, that produce such large clutches when they get big. It's a lot to ask of a snake. And I don't, I didn't have any data on this at the time.
Yeah.
But, I did not think that, you had females that were recovering from and then entering into another reproductive bout immediately the next year. I could be wrong on that, but I'd never wanted to err on the wrong side of the animal's interest. I always wanted to make sure they were doing right.
Back then, did you have like males constantly with females? Is that what it was? Like, did you always have?
No, I had them separated until we got later into the season, and I could usually tell, because when we started to have fronts come through, and I started exposing the collection, you'd come in, and the males are just pacing, swimming around. And usually if I'd wait for a good front, I mean, I started to become a real student of the weather, and I had was constantly tracking barometric pressure and when the fronts were coming through. And that's usually when I would pair them up. And for the most part, when I paired them up, I would see lockup like within an hour of them being introduced. But just in the interest of the animals, and I would keep them paired up for periods of time. Of course, never feed them together. I would always separate them. There were a couple of exceptions to that because I had some animals that were so mild-mannered that
You could get away with it.
Yeah, you could get away with it. But that was I wouldn't recommend that as a
You still got to sit there and watch it. I don't care how.
Oh
like,
yeah,
fucking-
absolutely.
I've played with that too many times and come back and seen some crazy shit. So
Yeah,
if I am gonna play that game, I plan on getting a chair or just sitting there the whole time until I make sure. You know what
Well,
I mean?
and I mean, and even when you.
I was just going to say, it's a good sign when you come out the next morning and 2 of the 3 perches are knocked off of the male's cage because he's cruising so heavy. He knocks all the perches off but the one he's sitting on. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, and the other thing, even if you do separate the animals, I mean, you put them back together too quickly and one of them still got rat scent on its face, it can go south in a hurry, especially with some of them that were very, very food driven.
And it's crazy. One thing I noticed is like you feed a condro a good sized meal, and then it acts like it's still fucking like it never ate anything. And it's like, dude, what the
immediately starts coddling again.
Yeah, once it gets into that zone, it's kind of like holy shit. So I definitely agree. Don't immediately put that male back in after it eats. I usually give it a couple days. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would like going back to what you were saying about keeping them, if I kept them paired up. I sometimes in the interest, it's that whole absence makes the heart grow fonder thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes keeping them separated and then reintroducing them and separating them and reintroducing them is
Absolutely.
more effective than just leaving them together.
You bet. Absolutely. I agree 100%. And I'm so on board with your thought about weather patterns coming through. So, I'll check my phone for weather patterns. And if I see a French moving in or temps are getting ready to drop, I won't even introduce them until that happens.
Yeah.
Just give them the break. And I agree, separating them, unless they're just, sometimes you put them in and they'll pair every night. Just every night, every morning you go in, the next morning they're locked up. Well, that's happening. You leave them in, but once they separate, give them that break. And if it's a week before those temps drop again or a front comes through, give them the week off,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic journey. I mean, I ended up, I didn't even know it was a thing. This was back when YouTube was kind of sort of in its infancy, but I went through, I spent one whole summer building an incubator, firing it up, waiting for it to reach, its equilibrium, testing it with thermistors and all sorts of stuff to try to find out if there were any hot spots or there was good air circulation. And then I would break it all down and I'd try a different configuration. And I did that over the course of the year and then came up with a design for a cooler. I made a goofy little video about it and put it on YouTube and started getting checks from Google back when AdSense used to pay money.
Damn.
And it was crazy because they got to be pretty consistent. And it was, and I still run into people. I ran into somebody when we were in Dallas that was like, "Oh, I've got one of your incubators." And it was just a goofy.
I used it for a while.
Just a goofy modified cooler, but it worked great. I mean, I had great success with that cooler. And
It's
probably what
Patrick uses too, right? Patrick uses some kind of cooler incubator setup.
He has a few. He has like 2 or 3.
Yeah, so it was, this is one of the things I've loved about the hobby. It's not only the excitement of being in the presence of a beautiful animal, but learning how they tick and all of their little quirks and learning how to do it better. There's always an opportunity to learn something about how they need to be kept and how they need to be taken care of. And I love the mental challenge of that, of trying to solve all those little puzzles and try to figure it out. And then the great thing about, tree pythons is that the varieties just, through the roof. And so you've got so many different options. Yeah. And the colors are remarkable. They're
Damon, what'd your first albino sell for? How much?
The first albino I sold was the 2 young ones went together. and I parted with those under a non-disclosure agreement.
So what does that really mean?
Well, yeah. So I think, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I guess everybody. I had to be careful when we first made the announcement, and I think it was quite a while before, because those snakes hatched in January of 2002, the first clutch.
Wow.
And it wasn't until that August that I said anything to anybody other than Craig. And,
it was Daytona, right? It was the Daytona.
Yeah, it was
show
it was in Daytona. Yeah.
I still have the flyer that you made.
You waited
Yeah.
months. You waited damn near 8 months.
8 months, yeah, and partly because I knew that I had seen what had been happening with, at the time, the piebald ball pythons and all the onset of all of that part, and how big some of that money ended up getting, and it got, I think my awareness of that, and the fact that when you're broadcasting, that you've got animals like that there's security, and that's part of the reason why I waited as long as I did, because we needed to do some stuff as far as security went, to make sure that that it was going to be that I wasn't going to be creating problems by announcing that that we had them. That was just a precautionary thing. Other than those two that I'm talking about, and I think I've not heard anything about whether they've whether they've bred. I'm sort of under the impression that where they went, they may have been more prized for their rarity than they were their potential. But the person who ended up buying them did not want any of the details of the exchange to be. Now, I can say that I did sell hets and possible hets, and I think that year that I produced the first clutch of hets, there were a number of them that sold that year for $12,500.
12,500, and these were just hets.
Those were hets. Yeah,
Well, I could imagine.
Damon,
How
was your,
long after? Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, was the buyer of the albinos, was it a U.S. buyer or overseas?
Overseas.
Damn.
Makes sense.
They went to India.
How long after you'd produced Floyd was this? Was this from the same parents, or is this from offspring?
It was from the same exact pairing, and it was, those animals came out. I think it was 2 years after that clutch, so it would have been in 2004 that those second ones. And I had them. They were, probably 16 inches long at the time that I parted with them.
Now I remember that you had also started. You bred Floyd to bred him into some other, I want to say some Trooper Walsh stuff, some other kind of more designer lines. Did you ever produce albinos from anything other than the original pair?
No, I never did. I'd produced hets, but I was still probably 2 years away from getting those hets, big enough where I was going to be able to pair them up. My focus was always going to be long game, right? So I was trying to sort of outbreed. I didn't want to, do anything to create any sort of deleterious effects in the youngsters, and I'm realizing that you're starting with just a single gene. There's kind of some creative avenues to be able to, at least be able to pair up hets from two separate out pairings and all that kind of stuff. But I never did. Like I said, I had hets, and I was eager to find out. There was a period of time where I was accumulating animals that were very remarkable as red juveniles, so that I could, ultimately see what that red route was going to turn into. And I was trying to pick animals that were prone to being very dark.
Marshall.
Yeah, so I mean, I went down. I was going down that road, but never did get any of those before I started kind of divesting myself from, from that group. I never did breed. So there were 4 albinos produced, and all of them came out of that original Tanamera pair.
Hey, Damon, I have a question for you. What else were you working with at the time? You had a massive collection. Was it most of the locality stuff, or?
I tried as best I could. Now, my problem is that, like I was saying earlier, I got my start looking for gray-banded king snakes in West Texas, and as with a polymorphic species that can differ, even within one locality, and differ greatly across, distances between localities. Locality was like a discrete locality was very important to me. So the idea that something was from Yapen or Biak, like that's cool, right? But I wanted to, so I was always on the hunt for, and it was hard to do because at the time it was farmed imports and other stuff where you were kind of trying to, find something that had a definite tie to, so I was always on the lookout for, females that may have been collected gravid that laid eggs at a farm in Indonesia, so that you knew that those were, legitimately from, that spot, and not, because it's easy to say like, oh yeah, well, Biak, well, you get one from one side of the island and one on the other. Those snakes never would have met naturally, over the course of their lifetimes. And that was kind of an important thing to me. So I was doing, most of my effort shifted after the albinos were produced towards kind of creating a palette of good options for potential albinos down the road. The Merauke's were really my only, the only ones that I had hard data on. The other ones were, sort of generalized.
So you were collecting strict locality animals at the time, whether they were imported,
I was trying to,
or captive bred.
Yeah, and the Merauke, the Tanamera animals that I got from Tracy that was basically my first opportunity for that, because prior to that, the only things that were really available in captivity were progeny from long-term captive projects, either coming out of troopers stuff at the National Zoo or out of the Sedgwick County Zoo, or any of the zoos that had them had kind of disseminated some babies out into the, they would come in. I was born and raised in Florida, and I remember going to the import houses, and you'd see the animals that came in, but typically by the time they made it there, they were in such horrible condition that it wasn't even worth, messing with. It wasn't until, the kind of, Cameron was doing a good job of building out a farmed situation where they could control for pathogens and keep care of animals in ways that, prior to that, snakes would get strapped to a stick and carried to the local, port and stuck in a box, and you were lucky if it made the trip alive, and so it was, there wasn't a whole lot available prior to those Merauke animals. And that was part of the reason why I was so excited to be able to get them, because I knew where they had come from and how Tracy had gotten them, and that they were, that they were good, legitimate, tight locality animals, and the fact that, they had a big white stripe down the back, which was a phenotype that, as of that time, was really not prevalent at all, that I had ever seen in North America, at least.
It's not prevalent now either.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well,
David,
and it's,
I'm sorry, continue.
no, you're good.
I was going to say, who's this guy? Am I in the right place?
That's
that
me.
you? Is that you?
That's me. Yeah, that's me.
I found it.
Long time ago, man. I was just a baby back then.
Wow.
Yeah, it was funny. Those habitat systems racks back there, I got from Tom, and I had done some website work for them and trying to help them out, and had gone to Iowa to give a talk to their Herp Society. And he said, well, can we work something out? And I'll, yeah, there's the incubator.
Yeah.
He said, can we work something out? Maybe help us with the website and the photography, and we'll send you some cages. And he was real excited to be able to do that, and then sent the cages to me, and I picked them up at the cargo office and brought them home. And he said, "Man, I'll bet that's gonna, really be a help." And I said, "They're full." And he said, "What do you mean they're full?" And I said, "Well, I'm right in the middle of hatch season, and every single one of those boxes is full."
Wow.
And one of those racks was like 4 wide by 25 tall, and the other one was 4 wide by 8 tall or something. All those racks, I filled those up in about a week.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was crazy, but I spent a lot of nights on a stool with a red headlamp on, wiggling, pinkies in front of those things.
Okay,
But,
let's get to that, right? Because we always talk about the frustrations with like personalities with these damn neonates. You got the straight shooters that fucking, what we all wish for. They take like with no issues. And then you have some that like to take and drop, and because once they hit the ground, like what were some of the things that like you were figuring out like, holy shit, this is what I got to do in order to get this thing to eat? We were talking about how daytime feeders were something that you were coming across versus nighttime. So we could talk about some of the like establishment styles.
Yeah, and this is kind of where it got a little tricky in some cases, because some localities, and I mean, you're dealing with animals that are in some cases insular, their populations relative to one another, and there's no gene flow, and so they evolve very discrete sets of characteristics or tendencies or habits based on where they grow up. And you'd think, well, it looks like the same green hill on the other side of this body of water than it does over here, so what would be the difference? But their natural histories are all adapted very specifically, and because there's no gene flow, there may be maybe a slightly different complement of prey items that are available in one island that are not available on the mainland. And so they all have tendencies. And I had a clutch of Aru animals that I was having a dickens of a time trying to get them to go, and they were always notorious for being difficult starters until I tried to start feeding them during the day. And then it was like a different clutch. Like they are all just grabbing things. And I mean, you have the populations like Biak and Yapen that can be, very defensive and quick to bite. And, they're, also quick to drop pinkies sometimes.
Yeah.
And,
Damn,
I also came at it from a perspective where, I cut my teeth breeding gray-banded king snakes, and they're lizard feeders. And, in captivity,
Amen, brother.
Everybody's trying to start feeding them pinkies, and it's like, no, man, they're not hard to get feeding if you give them what they need. And, the tree pythons were the same way. So I wasn't above, trying everything just to see what would work. And probably the most success I had was by superheating thawed pinks, so that if you had the temperature up, I mean, their ability to kind of predator vision those things. And,
but not even that's a guarantee. Like, and here's the thing. Also, I will say, geckos, whatever the fuck, there's no perfect prey item. I'm even realizing, like, even with geckos, sometimes these motherfuckers just don't want to eat. Like, and you have to either try a different time of the day or just try a different day. Period. But and I think I think we kind of, well, me especially, right? I quick to judge, like, okay, they don't want a pink, fuck a pink, but I've even realized one that acted like it didn't want a pink all of a sudden takes a pink fucking after it denied everything else you just tried giving it. So sometimes even circling it around, you realize like it just wasn't the right time, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it could not be the right time, or sometimes there's the presentation has a lot to do with it. And I go back again to the gray-banded king snakes, because you can take a thawed pinky and put it in there, and it might smell right. And you'll see that moment that the snake crawls up to it, the tongue flicks start to get really low to the ground, their eyes shift forward. They're obviously curious about it. They'll nose it around a little bit, and then they'll just crawl past it. Well, what I found out raising them here was that I'd capture Yuta, the side blotch lizards, and those side blotch lizards will sit there dead still, and that snake will crawl around the enclosure. And when the snake gets close to it, those things are just explosive in how they flee. They don't just meander away. They don't roll around like a pinky does, like a blimp. They don't just roll around. They shoot forward. I mean, they just explode from where they're sitting. And the snakes just immediately respond by like mouth gaping and chasing. And so, that movement sometimes is, and it's got to be a very key movement. It's not just wiggle, wiggle. Sometimes it's a real quick thing. And I had a lot of success, smacking them on the tails and getting all that kind of, but sometimes it's just an exercise in patience. And
that's why, listen, I know the aggression thing works, but I sometimes get so frustrated where I'm like, dude, MJ, don't get aggressive. Like, because I'll go overboard. I get fucking these things sometimes just piss you the fuck off, dude. And
yeah,
it's like,
you start pulling a
it's like, go ahead.
Happy Gilmore, like, what's wrong with you? Don't you want to go in your home?
Oh man. Well, the worst is like, you spend time, time after time getting it to wrap, and you're pretty sure it's good. You come back the next morning and there it is on the ground, and it's like,
I think there's probably parts of my body where I've got some like early onset arthritis from getting a snake to take a pinky and then just sitting uncomfortably still in an awkward position just so that they don't
We've talked about it time after time after time in those early initial feeding trials where that thing takes it off the tongs. You do not freaking move. Move a muscle. You don't pull your hand back. You don't blink your eyes, and you're sitting there frozen, literally.
Yeah.
For 5 minutes.
Just waiting for that first lip crawl. The first lip crawl, right? But they'll just sit there and hold it.
Oh yeah.
Damon, I've had them have it halfway down.
Yes.
You move back and it spits it out.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's not a done deal till it is all the way down and that tail is gone, and then you can, have a sigh of relief and slowly close that tub. Until then, it is game on, and they will spit that thing out 90% of the way down if you freaking move.
Yeah, they can definitely be frustrating. But I suppose, by the same token, the fact that they can be frustrating is sort of
the appeal, right?
That's why the reward is so great. That's why.
Yeah, exactly right.
Getting any success makes it all worth it. It just a little bit. Like you could have a clutch of 20 goddamn chondros, and if you have 5 good eaters, you're gonna be happy with that. Like for now, you know what I mean? Like
right,
because it could be a lot worse. You could have 20 bad eaters.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of trying to be creative and trying different things and being patient, but there's no easy answer. Like you said, there's no silver bullet food that they'll just go for every time.
I will say this. I just want to say, like, somebody, I was heavy in sales for one point in my life. And, I had a confidence where, like, I just knew that sale was coming. Like I would tell myself, like, I'm going to get this. Even though it would be like a crazy goal, I would somehow hit it. And I would just tell that, like, I would have a good feeling about it, right? And I feel like when it comes to feeding chondros, you got to have that confidence, but a good feeling, like good mood confidence. Like your approach is everything going into feeding. Like if you're a little bit like frustrated with your day or you're you're not going to have a good time. I'm just telling you right now, you got to be in a good mood. It's kind of like how, dude, there's some, oh my God, I used to fish back in the day and I used to go to the pier and you would just see like these Filipinos who just were killing it because they had the best patient in the world. And they would just sit there while you're just like, you know what I mean? I just feel like it's a big mental game as well. 110%.
Yeah,
it is. If you go down and try to feed snakes and you're not in the mood to do it, I mean,
it's not going to work.
Just stop.
Hang it up.
Stop.
Hang it up.
Right. Or you're in a rush. You're okay. I have an hour.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
I tried doing that, dude. That's the worst. Yeah. Oh my God.
So Damon, but back to the albinos. Obviously, I have a lot of questions for you. So the 3 that survived, they were good feeders from the get go, or
yeah,
what?
I was blessed in that regard. I would have classified all 3 of those, and especially Floyd, as being among some of the most robust hatchlings that I ever raised. They were they put on size pretty quickly, even though I wasn't, overfeeding them, and they were quick to feed, and never gave me a lick of problems, and other than that, and even any of the the possible het siblings out of that same pairing were all very strong, vigorous animal, so didn't have any trouble. And even the outbred hets that I produced a clutch with a snake, if I'm remembering correctly. Her name was Hujan, and she came out of Trooper was eager to get another one of the animals that Tracy had produced, and we were talking about, working out a trade. And he said, well, I just produced some snakes out of Carolina, and would you be interested in swapping? So I'm like, yeah. So he sent me some babies out of that group, and one of them just grew up to be I don't say one of them, all of them grew up to be just absolute smoke shows, but one of them in particular was, man. And I've got a picture of Floyd and that female sitting on a branch together, and even the babies that they produced were very strong, very strong eaters. I never really had issues with any clutches. I mean, that Aru clutch was a little bit more of a challenge to get feeding, but any of the other stuff, maybe I was just prepared for it. I was used to raising gray bands, and I was just used to it and was able to get them going and stuff. But no, I never had any issues other than that. The sibling to Floyd but I mean, it was one of those just runt situations where you get, a whole clutch of normal size snakes, and then one that has like a slightly smaller head and a really small body. And
Marshall, was it your albino runt? Kind of like, wasn't it the smaller one out of the bunch, or no?
Not this one. This one was, I wouldn't call it a runt. This one was, I would say, undersized because its umbilicus was tied in a knot. It knotted itself around its umbilical cord. So it was a little smaller than the others. But in the past, I have had, I produced now at this point, I'd have to go back and look the exact number, but 6 or 7 of them total. And most of them that have not, out of those 6 or 7, only 2 have survived, really have ever established what I would say, gone on to eat on their own. One of them, is the one that from 2014 that lived to about 2 years old, and the other one is the one that I have right now. But all the other ones have been runty. They've been, undersized. I don't know if that's just, it's encouraging to hear that you never had any problems with that, because, just based off my small sample size, I've always kind of wondered, hey, is this something that is, inherent, that's tied to the albino gene somehow, or, so it's encouraging to hear that you had better luck.
You had made mention of that when we were in Dallas, and I was pretty surprised because my experience with mine was that they were all very vigorous and robust and good feeders, and so yeah, who knows what it is, but it's probably encouraging to know that at least in my case, it wasn't the case. So that way,
and also interesting to know for those who don't know, Trooper produced Midas, which was his albino, maybe a couple years after you did. It might have been the next year.
I think it was a couple years later.
Okay. So the origin of his snake was the same as yours. So he ended up getting a male from Dave and Tracy also, and I think kind of when you produced yours, I knew that Trooper this was before he had even produced Midas. And so as soon as you produced yours, I knew that Midas was a sib to the snakes that you had. And like immediately I had purchased Versace from Trooper before you produced Floyd. And, my brain immediately went to, holy shit, Versace's a possible het. At that point, he was like we were calling him 12.5% possible het, 25% possible het. It was like a possible het from a possible het.
Right. But threaded the needle.
Yeah, right. So yeah, only took whatever 13 years or 11 years to get the first one.
Well, and who's
uh,
to say that that what we were talking about earlier about this geographic variability in these animals that are adapting locally, to conditions that might not be shared by populations on the north side of the north coast of the island, or who's to say that the combination of South Coast animals and North Coast animals doesn't create this kind of broader diversification of traits and adaptations that that might allow some things to kind of rise to the surface. But I'm confident that if you keep plugging away, that you'll end up with some big old fat strong biters.
I got to ask you,
Yeah,
Damon.
well-
Oh, go ahead, Marshall.
No, I was going to say this one's been generally pretty good. Once it, I had to assist feed it a couple of rat tails to get it going, but once it took the first meal, it's hadn't looked back since then as far as the feeding goes.
How old is that animal now, Marshall? A year?
Hatched in March. Hatched in March, so it's whatever 9 months or something like that, 8 months.
Well,
Hey, let me
good,
ask you a
good.
question, Damon. I got a little stickler in the fucking chats right now. I don't know if you know him. His name's Ryan Young. He has a thing with red neos or some shit. But what's your take with what's your take with Marshall's like potent side of the chondro side of things? Because a lot of the stuff that Marshall works with is like really, really potent designer stuff. And
Right.
his comment to Marshall saying that Marshall's designer albino blood has way too much other like non-real locality stuff involved with it. I want to know what your take is with the whole designer side of things.
So it's a complicated issue, but I can tell you from a genetics standpoint, I'm not aware of a situation in which you could start to produce, at least with the number of generations that have been produced by these lineages in captivity, where you're gonna weaken it. So this is kind of what I was talking about with the locality animals. Let's say you've got some Tanamera animals that look the way they do, and they all from that locality look very, very similar. And not too far from there and over the top of the mountains, you run into the Manokwari and the Sarongs and the Jayapura types, that are different animals. And even just in a small change like that, there's a tendency towards variability even within localized populations. But if you take two animals, same species, or in some cases different subspecies, but if you take those two animals and pair them together, the variety of genes that they now offer their offspring is much broader than what they would find within the core of their own populations. And so I don't think I would have an issue with the designer side. I know that there's been some hypotheses put forward about that. And quite frankly, I'm out of touch with, just how it seems like there was a lot of outbreeding that was going on, even with those designer groups. And I think it's not so much, the sort of what people would think would be inbreeding to arrive at a designer snake as it would be the diversification of the available, genetics that will allow kind of weaker combinations of genes to potentially surface, right? So,
Daniel,
go ahead.
I'll play devil's advocate here. And I'm saying this coming from, probably the king of designers, is that now that these animals are not the same species, okay,
Right.
now, they are not the same species. And so now you're looking at technically breeding hybrids. And you can look to other hybrid breedings, whether it's green trees to carpets or other, and the fertility issues are there, right? So I don't think it's outside of, a common sense perspective that if we are now breeding animals that are from different species, they're green tree pythons,
Sure.
That you could run into some potential difficulties, defects, weaknesses, in breeding, Viridis to Azuria, or, I'm just throwing that out there, the devil's advocate, because I'm a big.
That's kind of what you were saying
can,
before Ryan even asked the question. Is that you were saying that that the outcrossing could lead to essentially weaker
potentially weaker combinations. I mean, if you think about it like this, right? If you go to the bull snakes in West Texas, right? Juneau Road, they get monstrous. They're over 8 feet long as adults. And if you were to take that same Pituophis and breed it to an Affinis from north central New Mexico, where as adults they're 3.5, 4 feet long, maybe those two species have evolved, or subspecies have evolved to have completely different preferences for prey. There's a reason why bull snakes get to be 8 feet long in West Texas, in that part of West Texas, and why gopher snakes don't get any bigger than they do in northern New Mexico. And if you were to breed those snakes, they no doubt would produce viable offspring. But now you've got this kind of cocktail of genetics that might be a little confusing in terms of the prey preference, or the tendency to, you might get siblings, one that would grow to get big, one that wouldn't get that big at all. One that would have more phenotype of the sire's genetics, and one more of the dams. And so, with the tree pythons, because there is that insular aspect, especially with Aru relative to Irian, but certainly there's geography in between those areas, and gene flow that doesn't. And it could be that the Tanimera animals are evolving that stripe because in that particular area, it's obviously beneficial, but it doesn't show up over the top. It'll show up in Papua, but it doesn't show up over the top on the North Coast. And there's a reason for that. And so just the fact that phenotypically they're different, it would stand to reason that there's other things about their nature that are also different. They're dealing maybe with different predators. They're dealing with different prey types. And it might be different species of the same prey type, but they're dealing with differences. And when we pair them together, because they're both green, you ultimately run the chance that the offspring that you produce now have this smorgasbord of potential genetic combinations that, and some of them might not work well together. Right? I mean, if you've got
for sure
one that eats one thing and one that eats the other, and you breed them, and the one that eats the other doesn't like what you're trying to feed it in captivity, it can be a problem. Yeah. And that's me speaking from the locality side, because I can see what very minor. I mean, goodness sakes, go to the Gulf of California and look at all the insular gigantism and insular dwarfism and all of the remarkable things that happen when there's no gene flow. And they turn into different beasts. They might be of the same genus, but they're just different. Now they've evolved to eat different things and different deal with different climates and more extremes. And when you pair those up, the chances are that you're going to end up maybe some that get like a sort of a genetic vigor, right? That might even be more robust than either of the two combined, but you're also going to be getting the downside of it too, where you might be, having occasional animals that are less well equipped to be able to, to deal with life.
But at the end of the day, it's not for you.
It's not for me. What?
Like me, as far as like, when it comes to like mixing stuff, like, putting two green, like if two green snakes aren't the same species, right? You prefer to stick to the same species. Like if you were to, if it was in your own collection, your own projects, your own room.
Yeah, it certainly would be my preference, and it would be my preference to have animals from the exact same spot, because I know how much that means for, I always.
Hey, this is Ryan Young. Right? This is Ryan Young at home right now. Yes.
Part of what I loved was the idea that when I hatched out Tanimera hatchlings, that they were going to look like what I could find if I went there and looked for them. And that's exciting, right? I get the idea of designer stuff, because who doesn't gawk at the thing that's crazy? But some of it gets extreme, I mean, when you
I like
breed,
extreme.
well, and that's fun. But when you breed, like when you take something like a blood python and breed all the color out of it, like it's novel, but I don't know that it's, it ends up being, I don't know. I've just always liked things that looked like they were supposed to look. And so that's why I always gravitated towards locality stuff. I never, and the market kind of went off. I think what happened was that in the glory days, what I used to think of as the glory of the days, and I suppose everybody does this about, their formative time in their youth. People worked with the things that they were passionate about, and they went and sold and exchanged those offspring to other people. But eventually, shows like Daytona were full of all of the people that you had sold babies to, who had now raised those babies up and were trying to sell them to other people. Yeah. And there started to be this kind of an arms race, and then you started to hear terms like investment quality boas and pythons, investment quality snakes. And then it kind of took a different angle where people were more eager to produce the oddity that was going to give them, leverage with their business. And that's where things got creepy for me. I mean, I ended up getting yelled at on the phone one night because I got a phone call from somebody who was wanting to mortgage a house and use an inheritance to try to buy animals, because it was going to, and even the conversation, it was going to, this was the, they were going to get a leg up. They were going to be able to be the, and I'm like, no, man, you gotta, and that's where I started feeling icky about things. Because it's one thing when, when you're all in the same room and you've all been doing this for a long time and you've all produced snakes, and it's nothing. It's come easy money in some ways, that you go to a show like Daytona and, you find yourself walking out of there at the end of the day with money that seemed like it came pretty easily. Yeah. And then you have it to be able to apply to something else that's amazing. And, that was always kind of fun. But when it started turning into a weird, I don't know, that's, I suppose, a different range.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole dynamic of the ball python market today. People who are not into, have not always been into snakes, people who got into it because of the oddity, people who, that's the whole, the arms race you were talking about. Who can make the most weirdest thing that looks the most different from what a ball python is supposed to look like? That's what everybody wants.
Right.
Who can put an emoji on a snake?
Yeah. Who can make the coolest thing that doesn't have bulging eyes and head wiggle? You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know. It's kind of crazy. And that's one of the things that I always loved about, the weird, the sort of the smaller niche groups of snake keepers, even the chondro groups. I mean, going to the arboreal symposiums when Mark had first come up with the idea of doing those were great, because they were a wonderful combination of people that were passionate about the animals first and foremost. They were good people, Rico and Trooper, and it was just fun to be amongst friends and amongst people who had a passion and an idea, and a goal and a the people that were just excited to be able to work with the animals. And that's something that I miss, and probably part of the reason why I got away from the shows and stuff was because it seemed like it was just more of a facade and a smoke and mirror thing. And that's one of the things I mentioned Craig Trumbauer earlier, but I met him in West Texas. We got to be good friends, and I used to go and do that show in Daytona, Orlando and Daytona with them. And one of the things that I was so thankful to learn from him was just, he's still to this day, I mean, he's 76 years old, and he still he's like a kid on Christmas morning when he sees something that he hasn't seen in a while, or I mean, he can go back to just the basics. And I remember going down to his house and helping them prepare for going over to Daytona. And he's got this room full of Dumerils boas and tree pythons and gorgeous, a sibling to that Cheney eye that was on the cover of the Barker's book, just black and yellow jungle carpet at a time when they weren't that common in captivity. I had just a table of things that people would kill for. And I walked in the door and he goes, "Come here." And we went back into the room and he took out a couple of water snakes from South Florida that were stunning. And he was like a kid, like, with his toy. He was so excited by this water snake. And his passion ultimately was key into him developing all of these relationships with the people who would repeatedly come and buy snakes from him. And he was always a wonderfully charitable. There was always that one kid that would come, the parent that begrudgingly said, "Okay, we can go in, but only for an hour." And there was that little kid who, knew mom and dad weren't going to spring for a snake, but they thought maybe if they got puppy dog eyes enough that, maybe they could get something. Right. And I remember Craig seeing that on a number of occasions and, just reaching into the assortment of deli cups and picking out something that, likely they would not have been able to afford and just, setting it into their hands and saying,
I wanted to make a comment about your comment on people looking for extremes in these animals. Yeah. And I'm talking about, in particular, green tree pythons. And it doesn't matter if you're a designer person or you're a locality person, we're all looking for extremes. Whether it's David Brahms wanting to produce manicories that are black, or it's Ryan Young that wants to produce arus that have high white. We're all looking for extreme examples, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a normal human condition because, humans label and compartmentalize. It's how we make sense of the world. And we notice when things are at the extremes, when things are abnormal. And it's hard not to marvel over those things that are abnormal. And I guess the trick of it is trying to do it in a way, that is constructive and not destructive, right? Where, there were a lot of, simple recessives that were produced and then ultimately mass produced in ways that, it was one of the things that Craig always used to do when he was going to get into a project that was genetically related, was that he would get whatever he was getting, whether it was albino Nelsons or albino Ruthveni or something like that, and he would immediately pick up unrelated normal animals so that he could outbreed and sort of, limit or mitigate, any potential that there was going to be some issues from the inbreeding that is required by a simple recessive in order to produce it in numbers. And I think this in the same way, that it would be understandably exciting to produce black chondros or high white arus. Who doesn't like how many times have you seen pictures of, a whole enclosure full of arus and your eyes immediately go to the high white? Immediately. Yeah. Like, look at that one, right?
Well, so there's no misunderstanding. There's nothing wrong with wanting extremes.
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all.
It's whatever your cup of tea of extreme is. It's kind of like,
Yeah, I think just where it gets to be a problem is if, it's more the path to the extreme than it is the extreme, right? It's very easy to marvel at the extremes because they're outliers. They're rare, and so it's easy to notice those. We always notice what's different, and I think if you're, and this goes back to to Trooper. This was a great lesson from Trooper, was that he loved being able to kind of pursue that blue line. but Trooper was always just as excited with the ones that turned out regular green, you know.
So Trooper liked yellows. Like, you can be real. Do you like yellow neonates?
Yeah. Well, you know, I guess my my point is that, like, Trooper was, he wasn't so fixated on the extreme that he lost, you know, it wasn't the forest for the trees thing. It wasn't the complete end game. He appreciated all of it, but he also appreciated this.
Right.
And that was always kind of a very wise perspective to have. It wasn't only about the extremes. It was about, because what would the extreme be if that was all you had? It wouldn't be extreme at all. What makes it extreme was everything else, you know?
Yep. All right, listen, we got to get to wrap up topic time. I'm going to go first. And Marshall, if you need to double down on a question, that's totally fine with me. I know you didn't get to ask too many questions, but I'll go first. I know we talked a little bit about, you know, one of the things that you noticed was, like, you know, you don't need to pound them with food like a lot of people thought you did. And you're like one of the things that you noticed. So with you noticing these things that were maybe going over a lot of other people's heads back in the day, and with the weather adjustment and the cycling, like, where did you feel like the best diet program worked for your success with breeding chondros? Because there's a lot of people that like to go rats, a lot of people like to do mice, a little bit of both. What was it that you stuck to and that you felt that worked for you when it came to feeding adult females?
Most of what I was doing was I would go rats and mice. I mean, I would, you know, it was all rodent, but it was rats and mice. And I, for a long haul, was raising my own rodents, and I would use like a lab block, but I would also supplement with a whole bunch of other just raw grains and, you know, and even so much as, like, you know, grass seed and stuff that, you know, that you don't get in a, you know, most everything is processed corn or, you know, that sort of stuff. And I'd buy, you know, boxes of organic grass seed. Or there's a company in California called True Leaf Farms, and they sell, you know, like cover crop seed, nitrogen fixing plants, like things that aren't necessarily grown for crop, but just bags of seed. And I would supplement, you know, the lab block with that. And I would try to, you know, diversify not only the makeup of, you know, the mice and the rats, but the, you know, their gut contents and everything else. So I tried to, you know, kind of broaden that out. But I think the biggest piece of it is trying to understand, and I would implore anybody that's interested in getting tree pythons to go dig through the literature and find out what has been recorded for, you know, gut contents. And the other thing is just slow down on growing them up too quickly, because, you know, certain species can do that. You know, garter snakes are very high metabolic. They'll go from being a baby to a big snake in a short period of time, but other ones bide their time, and it takes them a while. And if you know, they'll eat as much as you give them, but if you get them too fat, you're going to be asking for some renal failures and carcinomas and all kinds of stuff that ultimately are not going to do you or the snake any good. And, you know, and I understand the excitement. I mean, it's hard, that delayed gratification of waiting 4 or 5 years to produce a clutch. Man, it's hard. A lot of people don't have that patience, especially in this, you know, modern society where everything is just instant gratification. It takes a while, and sometimes it's okay. And sometimes you need to take the time to let it take a while and just enjoy them.
And 100% you're right. When it comes to, like, you know, you think, okay, let me feed this thing more to get it to grow. You got some of these chondros that just aren't going to get big. Like, I have some females that are a lot smaller than other females, you know, and I to the point where I almost thought it was a male. And I'm like, dude, you're small, you know, but, like, for instance, you don't just keep pounding a snake like that. Like, it's as big as it's supposed to get. Just like humans, like, we're not all going to be fucking big people. You know what I mean? So,
well, and I think by and large, most snakes in captivity get, I mean, and I see it just routinely. I mean, how many times have you seen somebody posing with a picture of a big retic that's, you know, that's that big around? It's ridiculous. And every picture you've ever seen of a wild retic, even if it's a huge one, it's a big, long, spindly thing with these, you know, striations down its back because it's got, you know, curves and wrinkles. It just give them their time. And the other thing, and I had great success with this, and it's a hard lesson because you think I want to make babies. I want to make babies. I usually would give my females a year off after they produce the clutch eggs because it's strenuous. I mean, I can't imagine physiologically how expensive that is.
Right. All right. Who wants to go next? Bill or Marshall?
I'll go because Marshall may have more questions than me. Damon, what are your thoughts about the possibility of a piebald green tree python ever making its way into existence? We've seen the piebald gene in so many other snake species. Is it a possibility?
Pied chondro?
Yeah, I certainly think it's a possibility. I mean, genetically, there's a limited number of pathways for, production in subcutaneous pigments. And I think it's there just as likely with tree pythons as it would be, with other species.
And balls and all that.
And I seem to, and I could be wrong about this, but I seem to remember seeing a picture maybe that Cameron had showed me, Bushmaster reptiles, of a wild snake that I could be wrong. It's been years ago, but I could be wrong, but I may have seen one, but I certainly would not
throw it out of the possibility.
No, not at all.
Could you imagine?
Oh gosh.
I mean, there's got to be other morphs besides albinism.
Yeah,
right?
and they're in Indo.
Oh,
Indo
yeah.
has them for sure. They're just not letting us see it yet. Probably, who knows?
Well, and the other thing is that you've got with just the simple genetics that have gone through all of the colubrids and even some of the pythons. What happens if you get one that's anerythristic?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, "Oh man, what's going to happen with an albino?" It's like, well, it's not green, it's just yellow.
Yeah.
It wasn't that crazy. But what happens if it doesn't have the ability to produce that yellow pigment? Then what happens?
An exantic chondro? That'd be fucking sick.
Yeah,
or
right.
what would a melanistic albino look like?
Yeah.
You're right. Because
Ryan.
that was one of the things that Craig always used to love talking to Bernd Bechtel about, because he knew the genetics upside and down, and they used to love talking the hypotheticals, because sometimes how the pigment is placed in the dermis is kind of determines what shows first or what doesn't show. And yeah, so there's still so many options from a genetic standpoint. And certainly for as many as were being brought in farmed animals for a while, I'm sure there's stuff out there that hasn't been shared. But I mean, Cameron showed me pictures of what appeared to be an albino that they had at their farm in Indonesia, that came from the north side of the island, and it had some pretty visible patterning on it, just like the adult Jayapurs or the sarongs will have that kind of alternating blue dorsal line. It was apparent on an adult that something that I certainly didn't see in the in the southern version.
I have to believe that there are other. I mean, with Floyd and with your first clips that you talked about, it's almost like the differences are so subtle, especially when they're babies, that if you don't really, if you don't know what you're looking at, it's easy to overlook an albino green chondro.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, even that year that we showed up to Daytona, there were people that came by and looked at the poster that you saved and said, "That's not an albino."
Right.
It looks just like a regular chondro. It's just like a yellow baby chondro, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it even took me a period of time after they hatched to be like, this is just not, maybe it is. I guess it is, right? But it didn't look, I mean, I've got pictures of the clutch all together, and they're a little different. I mean, the dorsal markings were more red than they were kind of a burgundy.
Yeah.
But they almost looked like natural clutch variation. Maybe they were just a little lighter. And it wasn't until I'm like, wait a second, man, I'm used to that big dark patch in the back of the throat and the dark tongue. And here we got pink tongues and big old ruby eyes. I mean, I've got even Craig had framed this for me after the snake had hatched. But, there's see if I can get it in front of the camera.
That's the
you
eye.
know, yeah, and that was a picture that I took for that show, because if you looked at that snake from a distance, it looked very similar to its clutch mates.
It's
So-
very hard to tell them apart. I mean, even now, every clutch that I've had where I've, been expecting one, you have to really look at them.
Yeah.
Like I've kind of gotten where I can, now I can look at one and say, okay, yes, I don't have to look too much harder. I just know.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, from the at first it was like, I remember at the first at ICAST, I went to it and I had produced. I had produced the first two. This was in 2013, and they hatched right before I left. And I looked at them and I didn't think they were anything. I went to ICAST, didn't tell anybody, didn't know. I didn't even know until I got back. And somebody at ICAST suggested, oh, take a picture of them with the flash at night and see if the pupils are red. And, I did that as soon as I got back, and sure shit, there was that had red pupils. But I mean, I didn't know what I was looking at. So I got to think there have been others that have slipped through people's hands, not knowing exactly what they had.
Yeah, I know the one, the picture that Cameron had, the animal was, overall body coloration was yellow, but the vertebral line and those sort of alternating triangles were more of a lavender color. And it definitely had that lavender was unusual and it stood out. But with the yellow babies, it was harder. And I was kind of angling to go that red or dark or hyper melanistic. I had gone with some of the babies that were very dark burgundy, almost black as babies. And I thought, well, we'll see what this does.
Yeah.
But you never know. I mean, it could just turn out that you're going to hatch out a red baby that looks like a yellow baby. You never know. That melanin goes away and it's like, I don't know what's going on.
All right,
Yeah,
Mark.
what's interesting about it is that a lot of the red babies that have hatched, I think I've only produced one yellow albino, which was in the first year that I produced the two. All the other ones have been red, and some of them have been really dark. Like they've been some of the darkest in the clutch as far as the maroon goes. Yeah.
Wow.
The one that lived, the 2014 one. I was just some pictures of it came up recently on like my time hop or whatever, and they were that snake was very dark maroon, and a lot of them have been like that, So
Wow.
no black.
Well, I mean, I guess even on
but
snakes that are predominantly red, I mean, you still get albino, like corn snakes, for instance, that'll have very dark burgundies and reds.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not an enormous surprise, but you'd expect it to lighten up a little bit. But I don't know I don't know how normal melanin expresses in a tree python that's green, but what if you end up with these high black or melanin freckled animals? What happens then?
Right. Yeah, you got to think that would turn into white pigment on an albino, but
yeah, or it
hopefully we'll find out someday.
Yeah, or the dark pigment just gets out of the way and it looks, normal. I don't know.
Hopefully, we'll find out in a year or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll see. So my wrap up question is: you mentioned earlier that you kept Floyd for some period of time, and he passed on with you. So did you just sit on him all these years and just kind of keep him as just like a pet snake, basically? Or
I did. He and his parents, and it was like the kind of the family dog, And what's really funny is that I know how odd that probably sounds, and it sounded weird, or I guess it felt a little odd because I knew kind of what he represented and what he was capable of, but
for sure.
I'd had enough of a taste of some of the kind of nefarious financial side of things that I didn't want to go there. I felt like it was in some way doing him and the project a little bit of a disservice. And I know it probably sounds weird, but I don't know. I just was comfortable having him and enjoying him and his parents. And yeah, I had.
Did you ever try to breed the parents again, or not?
Yeah, that was Hujan. That was the blue animal that came from Trooper. And those
Thanks for the picture, Patrick. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah.
Gave me this.
That produced a clutch of hets, beautiful red babies. Yeah.
Damn. Did you
And
keep
you
back?
never bred the parents again after the second breeding?
I did not. No, I didn't. She was oddly large. She was a big female. She balled up on a branch, looked like a volleyball, and yeah, I mean, she just was a beast. I mean, she had a big meaty head on her. She was an impressive animal. Yeah, I got to a point where I was okay with. I was thankful for having taken on the project and not, seizing the opportunity to part with it early on for some of the offers that came in. And I was excited because I felt like I gave myself an opportunity to learn some cool things. But when it started going a little sideways, with the financial thing, because it wasn't just, it was this weird positioning and politicking, and if you're not going to sell me these snakes, I'm going to try to, there was this weird like sabotage stuff. I just didn't like it at all. Didn't like it at all. And that wasn't the reason I got into snakes. It wasn't something I wanted to deal with. And I was comfortable at that point, feeling like I had worked hard to kind of learn and get to a good spot, and I felt good just kind of backing up from it. And I've talked to a number of people since then that were like, man, I kind of dig that a little bit. And even when I was kind of backing away from things, I didn't, I don't know that I felt like I was necessarily making the right decision, but I'm perfectly at peace with it now.
I think that's a huge part of it is, being happy with what you've already got to experience, and just mainly like, it's because for you, at the end of the day, this is all for you. You know what I mean? Even though, a lot of people did get to, enjoy what you've produced. Like at the end of the day, this was all stems from a passion that burned within you,
Yeah, and it was the reason that I did all the weird stuff I was doing, where I was going to restaurant supply houses and buying stainless steel pans and trays and concocting air manifolds and trying to figure out how to incubate things. It was a great challenge, and they're fantastic animals. I mean, they're just absolutely fantastic animals. And I didn't want to, it felt like in some ways, it was getting to the point where you were pimping, it just like you were whoring out animals, and I just didn't like the way it felt, because the kinds of people that were in some cases reaching out because they were excited by the project, you could just tell they're excited for the wrong reasons. It wasn't like, I love tree pythons, this looks like it would be something I'd have fun with. It was, they were already counting beans, like when they wanted to start talking to you. And there were some very awkward conversations. And like I said, I got yelled at one night on the phone because I refused to sell snakes to somebody that I could tell was doing something incredibly irresponsible to try to make it happen. And I'm like, I'm not going to be a party to you potentially ruining your financial situation to try to get in on something when I can tell you from this side of it, it's exciting, but it's not what you're thinking it is.
So right now, I would say, Damon, the biggest push with the chondro game growing is a lot of ball python people are not jumping ship, but they're wanting to get into the chondros. And goddamn, if I had a nickel for every goddamn ball python breeder who sends me, like, let's just say like a post that Bill does, right? Because Bill will post some locks, and they'll send it to me like, hey, how much would these babies go for if I were to like let's just say like I were to have this pairing and I were to get the babies, like what are we talking here? I'm like, bro, shut the fuck up. How about that, motherfucker?
Yeah.
Don't,
dude.
Like
move
that's the first thing they think about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Move to a state with legalized weed and open a dispensary. Like,
a much better business plan.
Yeah, seriously, man.
Much
Like
better.
it's not, and that I really struggled with that because, and I'm so thankful I came up the way I did with people like Craig, because Craig and Linda always did so well, and all of the people in Craig's circle always did so well because they were first and foremost excited about the snakes. They were passionate about the snakes, and everything else was secondary. It was never like
what's
the
money?
primary reason for anything. He was just looking for something that was exciting. He wanted to learn something about a new snake. He wanted to go look for it in the wild. He wanted to try to raise it in captivity. He's always been that he calls it snake in a box guy. And that was an incredibly valuable lesson because, you know, I learned that it was more important to go after the things that you found intriguing than the things in which you found some financial opportunity. And
'cause
I was never,
Sorry.
yeah, I always stayed sort of on the fringes of it because I never had anything that was, you know, a kind of a genetics project until this one popped into my lap. But like I said, there were some people, and I was happy to kind of move some animals into some collections of, you know, people that I really respected, and I knew the animals were going to be cared for and cherished for what they were. But, you know, there was a big chunk of people who were just, you know, just looking for the angle. They were just looking, they didn't care about the snakes. It was like, I see that there's a price tag on these, and I know that these things lay, you know, 20, 25 eggs at a time. This is going to be my ticket, right? And it's like, no, these are animals. They're not tickets, you know?
Yeah.
If you do it right, snakes are an incredible hobby. Reptiles are an incredible hobby because, I mean, think of another situation where you have a hobby that pays for itself, right? Even if all you're doing is just breeding the things you love, you offset your mouse costs and your cage costs and your heat panel costs, and ultimately it's less expensive to participate because, you know, and then you share those offspring with other people that are excited. It's a wonderful thing. But when it starts to turn into
That's the
first and
best
foremost, yeah, and when it starts to turn in,
sharing those animals with people that are just excited to have them as you are is the best part.
oh, it is the absolute best part. And, you know, when you know, the paradigm shifts towards, you know, a primary financial interest, I mean, they're animals. They're not stocks or bonds or equities or, you know, they're animals. And if you do it right, you know, I mean, there's value there, but, you know, it goes sideways kind of quick with people that are, and that's the one probably lamentation I have about the direction that the ball python market kind of took captive herpetoculture, was that it kind of monetized it in a way where the monetizations was sort of out in front of the animals. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't sort of a backside.
Well, Damon, I'll tell you, MJ's right. The green tree python is heading that way, if it's not already there. The good thing is that
it's not easy.
but like Damon, you know, we're able to vet. You know, luckily we're able to vet the people that we release our offspring to because the demand is high.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're able to vet the people that get the animals that we're passionate about.
Well, and I always felt like when I was sending, you know, a hatchling off to somebody, that I was in some way like sending off, you know, one of my kids. And yeah, there's, you know, going to be some screening that takes place so that I make sure that animal goes somewhere where it can do some good, and that somebody's going to have an opportunity to develop an appreciation for them and maybe have a broader love for reptiles or just animals in general. If they have a good experience, it can be a good effect on their life. And, you know, for the people that were just looking to kind of play angles, I'm not sending my kids to your house.
No, fuck off. No, it's the same way I look at it.
Guys, I know people that the best part of their day is when they go out into whether it's their
bedroom,
their closet, their snake room.
It's me every morning, every time I wake up.
And they get to look at
butt naked sometimes.
TMI.
Sorry.
But they get to look at these animals, you know, and specifically in the case where I send somebody an animal, I know that's the best part of their day. You know, they got to go to their shit job that they don't like, or they work hard, you know, to get these animals that are not cheap.
Just get home.
but they just get home or they wake up and they go out there and they just relish in these animals. It's such a special feeling, and that should be the most important part.
And I will to capitalize on that, what Bill just said, I think the future relies on good experiences right now. Like the way we are going to make sure that this hobby heads into the right direction is making sure that we are creating these awesome experiences for people to stick around, because there's no sense of, because one of the things that are like talked a lot about ball pythons is like the pipe dream that was pitched to a lot of these people. Like a lot of people that came in 2020 were looking at these successful breeders like, oh, that could be me in 3 years. And the breeders were telling them, yeah, this could be you. Like, and it was kind of like something that was like, Marshall did it all the time. I'm just kidding, Marshall. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for all the snakes that I haven't sold.
No, but seriously, like but I feel like one of the things that Bill and Marshall and I do very well on these Tuesday nights is we paint a realistic picture. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it has to be realistic because we're not trying to paint any false narratives out there whatsoever, because we don't want people coming in and out of the chondro game. We want people coming in and staying here. Like that's because this is a beautiful place to be. Like, dude, Marshall, how many years now? Like, I love having Marshall part of this, because the longest running chondro keeper on Trap Talk for sure is Marshall, and he still love this shit, dude, don't you, Marshall?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I can't imagine not doing it.
Well, like Damon said, in the very first minutes of this podcast, it never gets old.
No, it doesn't. I love it.
Never gets old.
Never gets old.
Hey, what a great episode, Damon. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it. I've been keeping snakes in one form or another since I was, 13 years old, and it's one of those fascinations that it never gets old, and it's also expanded my world in ways that I didn't anticipate, because when I started looking for snakes, it was for the snakes.
Yeah.
But then I went to deserts where I came to appreciate the botany and the cacti. I learned how to read weather. I learned to understand what precipitation meant for the desert. I learned about birds and mammals and insect song and how all of those patterns overlap. And it was this sort of a pathway to learn so much about the world. And I got those Merauke tree pythons and immediately went face first into the geography books and was reading everything I could read about the savanna on the southern coast of Irian Jaya, and reading everything I could about it's just for people who are naturally inquisitive and passionate and have hungry minds, there's no better hobby. And when you have the opportunity to actually work with that animal and then see it come to a fruition and have a success, man, it's a win that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life.
And on speaking on that, on the exact opposite, I learned about people that way.
Yeah.
A lot about
you learn about what you learned about, but I learned about people, with these things.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about Craig earlier, Craig's book, when he was trying to come up with a title of it, and we were kind of bouncing around some different ideas. And, that was the kind of key message for all of the trips we had taken, all the snakes we had found, all the things we had seen, was that it was more than snake hunting. It was more than the snakes. It was the friendships and that camaraderie and that pursuit of a shared goal, and, being able to ping ideas off of people that were just as passionate about things as you were, was what that ultimately was the treasure, right? It wasn't the snake we found on the trip when we went to look for it.
Yeah. It
was all of those memories and the experiences and the fraternity and all of that happens during the course of it is the treasure. It's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, man. I didn't expect this episode to be so there's a lot of value out of what you said tonight. I really appreciate everything that you had to share with us. I definitely need to invite you back. I don't think this 2 hours was enough. And to be honest, fairly, I didn't know you were this tapped into the reptile world. I knew you produced the first albino chondro, but I didn't know how it was. I thought you just had money. Maybe you just came across it. Didn't know exactly the story leading to it, but I love hearing what I heard tonight, man. It it really made this episode what it was. So I really appreciate you coming to this show tonight, Damon. Thank you so much.
Well, I absolutely appreciate the invitation. The fact that y'all would take some time to even want to talk to me is something that means a lot to me. So I appreciate it.
Will you come back?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, cool. Good deal, man. Well, I appreciate it. Are you now listen, I don't know what your current state is with reptiles in general. I mean, you still have a collection that you post on Instagram at all, or are you active when it comes to any of that stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got racks here behind me or behind you.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I keep stuff and I started some kind of fun little projects a few years ago. And yeah, I'm always involved. Still go out and look for things. I do a lot of photography and videography.
Yeah,
and
I see you have quite the eye on the camera, man. You're pretty good.
Thanks. So I really enjoy that, and I've really been working to put together. You know, the problem is you get several veins in like social media or reptile entertainment where it's like it's the extreme stuff that's absurd. It's the free handlers. It's the rambunctious people that are yanking things out of bushes and, I guess my goal was that I wanted to do some things that were more meaningful and maybe a little more filmic. Yeah. And I've got a video that I'm working on right now. My wife and I went to Puerto Rico last year. Oh, cool. And I got permission and access to an area in the karst region on the north coast of Puerto Rico, and was able to, I was hoping to find just a Puerto Rican boa, and ended up finding 10 the first night and 12 the second night. Nice. And I was able to get video of those boas feeding on bats that were emerging from a cave.
Yeah, that's neat.
It's the whole story. It's the story of me trying to prepare for it, trying to know that I only have 2 days to try to pull this off. Right. My kind of self-doubt as to whether this was going to work, the logistics of trying to make it happen, and then the kind of success of it. But I was able to provide some of that footage to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they actually used it in some of the updates that they were given to the higher ups about policies for, their protection and everything else. So I've been doing that. I also noticed, sometimes I'll pop in and out of Facebook snake identification groups, and just because I like to see what people are finding, and one of the things that I noticed was that there were a lot of people who would ask a question. They'd find a snake on their porch and say, "Oh my gosh, what is this? Do I need to worry about it?" And the standard of response was typically the common name, the Latin name, and whether or not it was venomous. And that was it. Yeah. And, there's a real opportunity there from a conservation standpoint to do some education. And so I started filming a series of snake identification videos that are all, 3 or 4 minutes long, very well and high produced. I'm shooting in 6K, and I've got a glass table, so I'm filming them from the underside so that you can see what the venter looks like, because sometimes people find them after they've been hit by cars and they're upside down and they're like, that doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. So I've started doing that, but I've also been filming a bunch of time in the field, and I'm hoping it'll be kind of, it'll be a fun ride. I mean, I think if you like looking for snakes, it's not sensationalized. It's not crazy. I'm not free handling anything. But I do spend some kind of quiet times back in some places, and there's a lot of sound design and field recordings of insect song and birds and bugs. And
where can we check this out at once it's all done and whatnot?
So it'll ultimately end up getting uploaded to my YouTube channel, and the name of that channel is Nomad Herper.
Nomad Herper.
Yeah, Nomad Herper is the name of the channel. And so the snake identification videos will be going up here shortly. Cool. I started mostly with stuff in the desert Southwest. But there's, the Puerto Rican boa thing will be a fun, I think everybody's really going to dig that, because I have pictures of them copulating. I've got pictures of courting behavior. I've got video, not pictures, video. I've got video of courting behavior and copulation. I've got video of so both nights, the first night there were 10 boas, and all 10 of those boas caught at least one bat. And
wow. Damn.
It is a remarkable thing to watch.
Oh, that's neat.
So there's some pretty incredible footage from that trip. So there's going to be a bunch of that kind of stuff, but I still, I love taking trips and looking for things. But I still keep stuff. I've got a rock rattlesnake in a tank behind my desk that I've had for 12 years now.
What state are you in, Damon?
New Mexico.
Oh, that's right, New Mexico. All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I can't wait to bring you back. I appreciate it, guys. Do me a favor, give it up. It's a wrap for Damon, ladies and gentlemen.
Damon.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, buddy.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we'll run it up again sometime soon, man. Thank you so much, Damon.
All right. Take care, man.
Peace. Dude, solid episode. Holy shit. That was great. I didn't know he was that geeked out. Like, he's more geeked out than you are, Marshall. Like, he smokes you.
That's why I asked him on.
That was fucking great. Like, I didn't expect it to be that deep. I did.
I'm telling you, MJ, we've done a lot of podcasts now. That may be the most passionate episode we've ever been on.
I feel pumped up. I feel pumped up about what I'm doing. And you know what? I think I do want to produce yellow neonates after this. I really do.
I may want to go herping.
Let's not get crazy.
I may want to go herping now. It's fucking crazy. But listen, Damon and I couldn't be more different. Like, his passion about nature, wildlife, herping. I'm a guy that likes snakes in a box. But listening to that guy talk was pretty freaking amazing.
And I think having Craig as a mentor really fucking leveled his shit up too. Craig
For
really
sure.
looked out. Craig really looked after him, and then that relationship with the Barkers. Like, come on, man. Like, he was right place, right time, but he was the right guy for it too. Like, it all worked out perfect. I feel like.
Yeah.
Man, what a great episode.
You can just tell. You can just tell he's a super sharp guy, and his photography. I mean, he just gets really, really into whatever it is. All the details, all the his photography is amazing. Can't wait to hear or see all this stuff he's talking about with the Puerto Rican boas. That's
crazy.
Yeah, no matter herpers.
To watch.
I'm looking that up right now on YouTube. I'll put that link in the description below, so anyone else who wants to be on top of it, you guys go subscribe to his YouTube channel. But yeah, good boys. This was one of the best ones, I feel like, for sure. I really enjoyed getting to know Damon, and I didn't know, like I said, these are my favorite episodes when you don't know that much of somebody, and turns out the story that they have is very inspirational, and it's definitely one of these ones for sure.
100%.
All right, listen, enjoy the rest of your trip over there in buttfuck New York, wherever you're doing your thing.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Fortunately, I'm going home tomorrow. So
Red Mountain Herps on Instagram. And Bill, thank you so much. The mayor of Phoenix Reptiles. You guys will catch him here next Tuesday night. But give it up. It's a wrap for Bill Stiegel and Marshall Mendez. Have a good night, boys.
See everybody
see you guys.
See you next week.
Peace out, guys.
Adios.
Later. Have a good one. Thank you for everyone who tapped in. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button. Let's get the likes up right now. Subscribe, notification bell, select all. Be reminded of every podcast release out of the Trap Talk Reptile Network. Cush's Corner here tomorrow, 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Do not forget that. All right. Episode 565 in the books. Definitely one of the best All in the Tree Tuesday episodes. And I'm going to rewatch this. Cannot wait. Have a good night, guys. See you next time, and I'm out. Cheers.